Okay, hello. Live portrait painting demo has begun, and just need to make sure that everything's working. Let's see. There, I have, don't see my thing up. Okay. Apply. Okay, I think I have to pull up my other account because not seeing it. Um, okay, I see four of you have joined me. That's great. I am going to start just in 30 seconds. I was hoping I could get the feed on my desktop here, but it doesn't seem to be showing up yet. Oh, yes, I have to click on the thumbnail. Okay, great. I see Angela. Hello, Angela. Welcome. If anyone else wants to just send a quick text, let me know who you are if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. And some of you wanted to paint along. I assume that some of those people haven't possibly joined yet. Okay, I'm just going to adjust the camera a little. Sorry about the vertigo. Let's up a little. Okay, I think that looks really good. Hello, Keishan Bo. Okay, so I'm just going to start off the way I normally do, is just start taking some measurements. I'm painting on an 8 by 10 panel. I've resized this picture of Emma to match the size 8 by 10, and I will just get a little bit of, I think kind of start with a little bit of green on my brush. That seems to be the predominant undertone of this whole thing, as she is a noted emerald. So just gonna get, I don't know why I like starting from the center of the eyes, just getting a mark down. That gives me the mark from the side, and a mark from the top. So that's basically where the pupil is going to be of one eye. And again, so the second eye from the side. And a little bit closer. Okay. Let me just measure back to see, make sure I'm on. Occasionally I'm wildly off. Angela, if you can let me know how the sound is today, that would be very helpful. Okay, so that gives me my two eyes. I'm just going to get a little bit of black on here. I may have to stop at some point because some of my paints have run out completely on my palette, and just need to refresh that at some point. Okay, sound is good. Thank you, Angela. So just again, there we, for those of you who are on Instagram, I had a little bit of a vote for choosing which image to use tonight, and gave a selection of 4 images. And there was about 250 people who voted from my Instagram post. And this picture of Emma won just by like 1 or 2 percentage points. It was very close. There was another picture. Actually, I don't know. I don't remember the young woman's name of the other one, but I'm going to do her painting next week. Since Emma got 35% of the vote, and the other photo number C got about 33%. Okay, so again, I know this drawing's off because I can see the ear doesn't come that far in, and so I need to adjust already. So that's coming to about there, the side of the jaw, the turn of the jaw there. And I need to also get a measurement for the bottom of the chin. Once I've nailed down all these measurements, then some of the things end up going a lot more quickly. I could freehand draw it without measuring and then rework it once I get there, but just getting just a few of those landmarks down really does help speed up that process. There's there's all kinds of methods to getting to this point. Some people just start from the middle of the face and work their way out. Um, I like to crop the image until I get the cropping and composition that I want, and then I can by working this way, then I get to keep that specific cropping that I wanted. Occasionally, when I paint, the face will shrink or grow a little bit, and that I will have to adjust things. But for the most part, I've been able to keep the size relationships and the edges pretty good. Okay, I'm going very green there, but I know it's not that green. So I do have to get a little bit of my warmer colors out on the palette to mix, and a little bit of white and a little bit of my black to get it as neutral as I want. Okay. In future paintings, I'm going to play around a little bit with the tooth and absorbency of my gesso mixture by sanding it or maybe going a little bit thinner, because I have found that recently the way I've been applying the gesso, it's just a little bit too scratchy. So I got a question: do you sketch it with acrylic? And it's like, no, I'm sketching with oils, and then while the oils are wet, I can just keep on working. I do know a few friends who paint that do an underpainting in acrylic. It dries very quickly. They get it to where they want it, and then they do a finish in oils, and that just gives them the base and color that they want. And for those of you who work solely in acrylics or want to, I found acrylics difficult for a couple reasons. One is that they dry so quickly, so you can't get blending effects very easily. And the other is that it's really tough, but they dry back a couple values lighter than what you put them down. I think that's the direction. They dry back lighter. So it's very hard to judge the values as you're painting. I remember in school I would be painting with acrylics a lot, and I'd have the hair dryer handy so I could blow dry the color quickly to see if I was in the right color range. And didn't find that very fun. So I like oils. I've from the minute that I started painting with oils, I knew that that was the medium for me. Uh, for some people, they find it much harder. I don't completely understand that because I just think it's so easy. I think maybe they're intimidated by the all the solvents and mediums that are used when painting with oils. But I use Gamblin Gamsol. It's odor free. It it still is. It's you know somewhat toxic. You don't want to get it on your let it sit on your skin. But if it touches your skin, it doesn't burn or anything like that. I just make a habit of rinsing it off if I do get a fair amount on my skin. It also would uh, accelerate the absorption of oil pigments into your skin if you ever do get the oil paints on your skin. I also use colors that aren't terribly toxic. They're all modern synthetic colors that have a much lower toxicity than colors like cobalt blue and cadmium, all the cadmium colors. So I'm using naphtha red and permanent orange and what is the yellow? Hansa yellow. And those have a much lower level of toxicity. At the same time, they tend to be much stronger colors, have a very high tinting strength, so I prefer them also over cadmium colors, which tend to be very expensive. Let me see. Looks like we have 5 people that have joined us so far. That's good. I will keep on working and explaining as I go. This will be posted after um, the session's completed. I think it takes a half hour before the the posted session gets processed and put up by YouTube. And then so if anyone missed any of the beginning, they can go back and watch. Okay. I am just gonna check. I think that eyebrow comes in a little bit higher. There's a lot of yellow and green in her flesh tones. So if I just go with pure white, I'm going to lose a little bit of that glow that greenish glow that her skin has. I mean, it sounds terrible. It doesn't look bad in this case. Most people, if they're glowing green, doesn't look great. I also have to watch the angle of her eye and the relationship of the eyes to each other. It's important to compare as you go through this process. I'm just laying down general tones, trying to get close to the flesh tones as I see it. I really need to jump to a bigger brush because I do make this mistake a lot as I get so into putting down a few details and then I don't swish brushes and then I have to cover large areas and I find myself having to spend so much more time getting the color down. And this really does go much quicker if you just load up the brush with something that would be the approximate color for a large area and just get that color down on the panel. And that way that color becomes the base for the the paint that you put over it, and then you're adjusting out of that first color that you put down. That in a way that kind of ties everything together. There's some nice rosy colors in there too. Again, the rose colors are going to be, I may have said this in earlier videos or early demos. The reddish colors are going to be across her cheeks. She has green around her looks like a green fabric, which is reflecting in to the side, and it looks like she must have some green that's coming up from underneath too, because she has some green in the shadows, a reflected light in the shadows. And then is it possible that her that the light that she's using is also greenish? So so she has lots of green coming in, but I want to maintain those reddish colors. Otherwise, she is just going to look like a ghost. And so I may end up in the end exaggerating those a little bit just to keep her healthy looking. So a question from uh, Gillet, Gillet. Um, oh no, question from Justin. Thank you. I have a question. Is it okay to use a grid system time to get your placement correct? So a lot people start in different ways, and I had a video that had a little bit about drawing and tracing, and I think it's fine to start however you feel comfortable with. I used to work as an illustrator and would work on these large canvases for generally for Condé Nast Traveler magazine, and I would be working from a photo, and I would grid out the photo, and I would grid out my canvas, and I would get the drawing down that way. And that served as a preliminary base to get my drawing down, and but then I would work in within that grid until the grid was no longer, for the most part, visible. But at that point, I had enough of the paint and drawing done that I could just continue working. Uh, and like I said, I tend to work straight from measurement from the photo. So I'm taking measurements on the photo, and then I'm taking measurements on my panel, and just sorry about that, and just working that way. It is also possible to trace either from a preliminary drawing that you've done, or do a tracing of the photo. And the problem that I had with tracing is that there are some YouTubers in the same space that I am that it's quite clear that they trace primarily trace. I Let me get some white here before I go on. They primarily trace, but if you go through all their tutorials, they never talk about how they get the drawing onto the panel. And so they're teaching people how to paint, but they never say, well, look, and tracing can be a complex thing because it's not straightforward how you get a drawing of a photo onto your panel. And I think it's a shame that both they trace and they hide it from the people um, that they're trying to show how to paint, because they're leaving out a big step, I think, a little bit out of embarrassment. And I think they would be doing themselves and their audience a better service if they just are upfront about it. But I do think that the downside to tracing is that if you rely completely on tracing, then I think that you lose some of the drawing skills that are required to improve your painting skills. So tracing can be a great time saver. Also, for example, like the Florence Academy and some of the European schools of painting, it's common to do a very detailed, very exacting drawing off the canvas, and then when that's completed, to trace it onto the canvas. And there's several ways of doing that. Doing a tracing, one very common one is using a lucifgraph machine, and that essentially is a projector that projects the image right onto your panel or canvas, and then you just use a pencil or a brush, and you follow uh, follow the landmarks that are in that painting, or sorry, or that are in that photo onto the surface of your painting. One thing a lot of people also do is they take a carbon paper or tracing paper that has one side that has carbon rubbed onto it, and they lay it down on top of their panel, and they put the drawing or photo right on top, or a copy of the photo, and then they draw through. They put pressure onto the photo with a sharp tool or a pencil, and then that, like carbon paper, leaves carbon marks on the panel or canvas, and then from there they have the main lines drawn out, and then they can go work that way. For Justin, who asked about the grid system, for those who don't know, is that you create a proportional grid. Supposedly, the photo that you're working from is the same proportion of the panel or the canvas, your painting surface, and you lay out. Usually, it's like squares are the easiest. So if you have, let's say, 10 squares across the top and 12 squares down on the photo, then you would have 10 across the top in your on your panel and 12 squares down on your panel. And then where you see certain lines or shapes that cross through certain grid lines, then you make those same put those same landmarks or lines or shapes in the squares on your panel. And it doesn't take very long before you have most of the details of the photo laid down on your painting surface, and then you can begin from there. And then you can continue to use that as long as you can see some of the grid lines on your painting surface. You can continue to use that photo as a reference. Okay, I think I need to do a little bit of measuring to make sure that I'm getting the lips in the right place. Justin says, "Love your stuff. I follow you on Instagram." Thank you, Justin. So I initially had some following on Instagram, just so for those watching now or picking up, if you've come from Instagram or not. And I found that a lot of my followers were following me because they wanted to learn how to paint. I was able to ask people through questions on my post. People would reply, "This is I'm trying to figure out what you're doing," etc. So I would do as much as I could on Instagram by either posting detail shots or time lapse videos or process photos, work in progress, or process steps that I thought were helpful to people, and I think they were to some degree. But I felt in the end what would really be helpful is for people to see a video of me actually painting and some clear explanation of what I was doing. And I did a couple of Instagram lives, and I found that it was great, but it only lasted an hour. If you didn't get everything your painting done in an hour, then people would just get a demo of half a painting. And and the other thing is that Instagram, the way it's set up, is that after a day, your video's gone. So those who didn't have the ability to see you do it, then are out of luck. And so what I decided to do is to look at other platforms for doing videos. And so I did start posting regularly on YouTube about probably about 2.5 months ago, and I've tried to put up 2 or 3 videos a week. I've done some fairly post-produced time-lapse videos with a demo or a lesson, what I called tutorials, time-lapse tutorials. And the problem with those is that they took a good deal of time to do the voiceover and the cleanup work, and then cleaning up the time lapse too in Adobe Premiere. And I was a little frustrated by that process. But since um, but since I've started doing these live demos, I think that both from a time management perspective and then the quality of the information that you get is a lot better than anything that I've done so far. You guys get to see me painting in real time. I'm explaining what I'm doing, and that's in a way how I learned to paint in art school, by watching and then doing. I've encouraged anyone who wants to paint along at the same time. I know that's a little bit of taxing, but it sounded like people were pretty much up for it. And so I have, if anyone wants a link to the photo of Emma at this point, it is on my Instagram account, on my Instagram page. That's AJ Alper. And let me see. Smaragda, killing these names. Smaragdas, I'm drawing the photo along with you. Great start. Okay, great. So I'm glad someone is drawing. The person who's in this photo, Emma Thole, said that she was going to join in and do watercolor painting at the same time. I hope that she joins in. If Emma, if you're already in, please give me a text to let me know that you're around. Oh, I see. Emma says that's me, the one who said I'm drawing along with you. Okay. Um, Emma, the woman of many names. Okay. She's a different name on each account that I have seen her on. So I've just reloaded my black just so that I can start to get in things like the pupil of Emma's eye. Emma, I hope you don't mind that I continually talking about you in the third person, just because I think your photo is like different than you. But anyway, I hope it doesn't seem rude. So as I'm painting the two-dimensional shapes, and I've said this on the last video, I'm also trying to trying to visualize that shape, the anatomy, or whatever it is in space also. And when I say in space, I'm trying to think about how quickly something is moving away or towards me, so that I'm getting the feel of that thing as I'm drawing. So I have a question from Shayna, who asked, your art is incredible. How much time do you spend each day painting? Well, that's varied over the last few years. I have a full-time job, so, and a family, and and a house to maintain. So all those things, in a way, take priority over the painting. And then occasionally I do like to sleep. So I try to do 1 to 2 paintings a week. These are paintings similar to this one. They're Alla prima portrait paintings, which are more like sketches than very highly rendered portraits. And for a long time, these had been taking me on an average of 8 hours a piece to do. So if you do the math, if I'm doing about 8 a month, and they take about 8 hours each, that's 64 hours a month, or about 2 hours a day on average. a lot of times, obviously, that's compressed into short periods of time. Um, so I'll be spending on in one day or one weekend. I may paint 16 hours just to get in the painting time that I want. Something that I've been trying to do is to restrict the amount of time I paint, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that I like to produce more paintings. That gives me more experience starting paintings and problem solving than if I spend a long time on one painting. And also, be with doing the YouTube channel, that's been taking up a little more of my time and cutting into my painting time. So if I find that if I work faster on the paintings too, then that gives me more of a chance to paint. Also, if I have a 3 hour window, I know if I start a painting, I should be able to finish that painting in that window. So it keeps me from putting off doing painting work. The other thing is that painting in a briefer period of time is sort of a self imposed restriction, forces me to be looser with the paint and leave a lot of the more of the process exposed. And that's a quality that I really like in the painting. And if I give myself too much time, I just will end up obliterating a lot of that. And so the imposed time really does help me leave a lot of that process exposed. I think that that is one thing I can say that distinguishes me from a lot of other portrait artists. And there's a lot of people that do paint in a similar fashion, that you see a lot of the brushwork and a lot of the process. But if I'm doing very highly rendered and hiding the brushstrokes, then I'm then working in an area that where it's not my strength, and there's a lot of people who do it so much better than me. So I might as well stick to what I do well and keep the painting short and sweet and do a lot of them. There is the risk of working too quickly um, that you lose the quality of drawing, or that the proportions will be off. And I think that with that time restriction, that becomes one of the challenges, is to make sure that you are getting everything down in the right place in the right way. And as I assume, as I do more shorter paintings, the better I will get at doing just that. So that's some of my reasoning there. Um, yeah, Ellen says, haha, laugh out loud. Sleep is overrated, and Shayna says agreed. Yeah, sleep is overrated. I don't do enough of it. And Angela is one of my coworkers, and she has caught me before um, with my eyes half glazed open. So um, dangers at work is you have to be well rested enough to do your job. And yes, thank you for that, Angela. Well, this is my addiction. So when I'm at home, I'm ODing on painting. Could be worse, I suppose. I could be addicted to other things. Okay, so I'm just going in and looking back and forth quickly between the photo and the painting and seeing where things are a little bit off. I can just carve in with the paint. Like right now, I just trimmed a little bit of her iris, and I may do the same from the other side. If I look, there's sort of this coolish green on one side in the white of her eye, and on the other side, there's just a little bit of, oops, I obliterated the iris on that side. Okay, you just put it back in. The beauties of oils, and there's a little bit of light, almost a warmish color. Well, there's some green poking in there, but it is definitely warmer than the other side. So I want to make sure I keep a little bit of that difference. That helps turn that eyeball so that it seems more dimensional. Any kind of, even a flat surface, depending on the lighting, it would be really hard to have an even lighting across a flat surface because each part of the surface is a different angle to your light source. So uh, a rookie mistake would be, if you have a wall in a painting, is to paint that whole wall the same color and the same value. And it just takes a little bit of looking to see that where that wall is closest or most directly pointing to the light is a lighter value, and then where it is furthest or more turned away from the light would be a darker value. And for those of you, when I say value, I just mean how dark or light something is. A lot of times I'll use the term value just to mean light or dark. Lighter value is lighter, a darker value is darker. I sometimes I forget. I went to art school, and I'd have terms drilled into me, and even at a different school, in a different environment, there might be different terminology. But then someone tunes in and they start talking about saturation or value or hue or chroma, um, or tint, tone, or shade very quickly, and then before I know it, I've completely confused the audience out there, and I know exactly what I mean. So if there's a term that I keep on saying and you don't know what it means, just please chime in and let me know so that I can explain that term. I think that that's highly beneficial and also reminds me of that I need to explain things in different ways so that more people understand it. The clinking you hear, I need a little bit of ice water as I go. It's a little bit warm in the old studio today. Mm. Oh, great water. Thank you. And so I'm just going to take note of where things are. So I need to bring this eye angle up higher and also measure its relationship with the other eye. So it's important to get the eyes aligned and pointing, looking like they are looking in the direction that they are in the photo, if that's what you intend. And it takes some very subtle changes to get it to. In this case, Emma's looking right at us, so I want the finished painting to look like the eyes are looking straight at us. And I don't know the secret to getting eyes to point in different directions. I just know that I have to pay attention to. Hello, I lost the connection there for a second. So, um, so I have a couple questions. While I make sure that the connection's good, I'll see if I can answer those. AJ, don't you want to do a live model or a more quality photo reference? Sketchy app is great, but feels a bit amateurish. Amateurish. No offense, I'm an amateur myself. So the the problem with Sketchy is that a lot of the photos are selfies, and sometimes the quality of the light or the quality of the camera is kind of low. And um, so to answer the second part of the question, but the reason why I like it is because there is something about selfies. For the most part, I'm doing selfies. Occasionally, I'll be working from professionally shot photos that are posted onto Sketchy. Um, can someone just text if you're still getting signal? I just want to make sure that I'm not just talking to myself because the service went down for a minute. Okay, you're getting me. So, so even though I'm doing painting is kind of a very old pastime. It's a low tech kind of thing. You're just putting paint on a board. The way I'm painting now is highly dependent on technology. I'm of an app on my iPhone, and um, and those photos are taken from by people usually on their phones, didn't line up or exist. But the reason why I like selfies is because I used to lament the fact that I couldn't get the resource images that I wanted. I couldn't get that sense of intimacy of people. I would see people on the street that I would love to, take photos of them or do a painting of them, but sort of that awkwardness of walking up to strangers and saying, "Hey, can I take a bunch of pictures of you? Because I want to do some paintings of you later." Um, just really was not great. And so, but the thing about selfies is that, in a way, um, people are taking thousands, tens of thousands of images of themselves in a very intimate way, intimate expressions, things that, and then they're posting it online for the world to see. And that has given me access uh, to people in intimate environments, kind of like with their guard down in a way. And if I can capture that in a painting, then I'm capturing something that um, is, how do I put it? It I think it comes across when I do a good job, the sense of feeling and emotion, that sense of vulnerability and intimacy that you really can't get from a photo that's taken by a professional photographer in a studio environment. It's there's a rawness to it. I know that you said kind of amateurish, but that is exactly the quality that I'm looking for. And just I do also do paintings from live models, and I had been over the last um, few years going to a painting workshop that's a live model in a studio, and then I, would be in a room crowded with people. I would not can have control over the pose or the lighting, and a lot of times I wouldn't be able to get close enough um, to the model, close enough to desired. Like I would, if it were me hiring a model, I would have a little more control. But then again, I have a day job. I don't really have a studio to hire a model. I would have to maybe rent space, um, and then it would just sort of be a crapshoot if I could get what I wanted from the model to do the painting, and then hiring the model over several sessions. And so um, the frustration of that has really caused me to move away from painting live models and doing more work from photography. And the challenge of photography, painting from photography, is understanding enough of the subject that you're painting and the anatomy, the underlying anatomy, and how the light is working, and understanding when you look at a photo, what are the light sources and how are you going to capture that and get the form to turn, all those things that get lost if you're not careful when you're painting from a photograph. And so there's a challenge there, but it's a challenge that I am accepting. Um, and then um, and then it's also possible, some people suggest, like, well, why don't you just go on Instagram and find some very high quality photos there and paint them. And there's a few reasons why I haven't been doing that. Um, Hold on. It's like Ellen says, yeah, it is very intimate and it is very new and modern. So quite smart to stick to it. I feel ya. Okay, so I explained myself pretty well. So here's the other end of the spectrum is finding professionally shot photographs on Instagram. And so the first problem is the permission. So on Instagram, you can go ahead and just, you know, when you paint, you can paint anything. But the minute that you start to repost your work, you are, in a way, in violation of the intellectual property of that photographer and the person that they shot. You don't necessarily have the rights, especially if you're doing something that is very close to the photograph. I am having a little problem with this measurement, so I'm going to just measure it again. So the other issue that I have is that when you see a photograph and you're, you know, stricken by it, stricken in a good way, um, you really want to paint it. Um, it's usually because there's a vision of the photographer, the cropping, the color, the lighting, the haircut, the hair, the makeup, all those things that go into it to make it a good photograph, and then the, you know, the expensive camera and all the equipment to make it work. And that, in a way, is that's the vision of the photographer. That's the vision of the model and the photographer together sometimes. And if I do a painting of that, then I'm not really bringing my own vision to the work. I'm just finding a vision of a photographer I like and just doing a copy of that. And yeah, I'm doing a copy of these photos in the same way, but I'm spending um, literally hundreds of hours sorting through the photos until I find the ones that I think will work for me and say what it is that I want it to say, and then paint it in a way that captures it in the way that I want to capture it. So that really is my vision in the end. So I can't say that if I'm just finding photos on Instagram. And Sketchy just happens to be a great resource for me to um, find generally selfies of people, and by posting them to the app, they're more or less granting permission for me to use that image to create my work. So I don't have to hunt people down through their direct message and get some sort of permission from them or for the photographer to do the painting and the like. It's just that's already done up front for me. I am not really explaining that much of how I'm painting, however, but I have to say that there's not a lot of verbal dialogue that's going on right now. I'm just looking at the photo and comparing it to the panel and then just modestly changing things as I go. I'm less than an hour in, so I think I have a little bit of liberty just to noodle around a bit. But as I start to run out of time, then I really do have to get serious about it. Little measurement. I think I'm pretty good there. There's something I'm missing, so I will talk about this. So around the eye, there's this. You're going to have this round shape, like a ball, and I'm kind of missing that. So there's this outer edge, a little bit greener on the far side. Light as it is closer to light and then goes dark again. But there are going to be some highlights here that catch the light. Um, and then and then there's this feature here. I don't know if, yeah, I guess you can see that on the camera. So this feature here is the top where the cheekbone then meets the, what is that piece there? Starts to slide into the temple here, and that is turning away in the opposite direction. And the space that I have between the corner eye and the ear looks wrong because I don't have the forms turning correctly yet. So I do have to get some light yellowish green, light whitish green, I should say, down in that spot where it's reflecting this greenish light here. And that is, there's some part of the cheek that's facing more upward, and in a way she's underlit, so anything that's facing upward is going to be a little bit darker. I'm just sort of scumbling these in a little bit, not really fluid strokes. And again, I dropped my bigger brush, I don't know why. um, and then we have another feature of the cheek here that's uh, turned towards the light that I think is coming down from underneath, and I have the reds of the cheek. Um, I will have to come in and refine these a little bit so that the the bordering values are correct, so that it does feel like things are turning in space, but it does help just to sort of in my mind think about which direction things are pointing. So like this part here is pointing off um, in front of her face, but then she has some forms that are pointing upward that again are darker. And this she has a little crease here that's pointing up. And there. Okay. Um, so let me see. Sketchy. So this is from Emma um, and from Ellen. Sketchy is awesome. Uh, from Ellen. Emma says Sketchy has actually changed my life. Hearts and smiley face with hard eyes. Um, eyes and mouth. I'm not sure what that means. In drawing the same photo, I'm having trouble with the mouth especially. I always focus exclusively on the accuracy of the eyes first and then place everything else measuring from the eyes, which is a fine way to do it. Um, and Ellen says, a very luscious mouth. Okay, well, I haven't put in a whole lot of detail, and it looks like parts of her mouth are actually thicker or thinner than they need to be to get it to feel right. And we also have, oh, I don't have, do I have enough alizarin permanent to get this? We have the inside of the mouth, which is catching very little light, so that's why it's so dark. And the same thing with the under edge of the top lip. And then, sorry Emma, your teeth are a little green, and I'm gonna keep them that way. Maybe make them a little blue and green together. Um, just like if you know who Johnny Rotten is, the famous punker, his he got the nickname Rotten because his teeth were green, yellow and green, and so the rotten part was referring to his teeth. Okay, I will have to do a little bit of refinement of that, and a little bit of what I'm missing then is just a very thin shadow that's on the underside of her lip. And I have the values actually are very close and fairly accurate on her lips at this point. Hopefully I have everything painted close to the right place. I do see that there's some forms in the nose that look like they're a little off, and hopefully, and I painted the mouth in relationship to the nose, so hopefully when I go back and remeasure that I don't have to repaint too much of the mouth. And so then there's this pinkish highlight on the bottom lip. If I can get a fairly clean light there. Then I can start to feel the light hitting her lower lip and get this darker red here. Okay, that's feeling a little more like it. I may have something here a little bit too high or too low. Let's see. It actually looks pretty close. Haha, oh my god, so awkward when you are reading it out loud. Um, the the very luscious mouth. Yeah, sorry. That's just what you wrote. And her whole face is green, man. Yep, that's a lot of people wanted me to do this photo. Emma, they commented that they wanted to see me paint it because of all the greens in it. They were really attracted by that. I think it was one of the qualities that I kind of struck out for me. But I also, there was something about the expression on your face that I um, really thought was interesting. I know that you posted this because you had a busted lip, I guess, which I read, maybe not on this photo, but a photo that was posted at the same time. And, but I think that that isn't really what comes across in the photo. There's just kind of an expression on your face that's interesting. So I have what's called the philtrum, which is this, if I'm pronouncing it right, is this channel in the below the nose. They say through evolution that there really isn't there isn't any real function for that shape. Um, I personally think it's I know this may sound disgusting, but I think it's a channel for when your nose is running to channel all that snot into your mouth. But that that I'm not sure what the evolutionary purpose for that would be. But I know my kids seem to, growing up, seem to think that there was lots of um, reasons why snot should end up there. Sorry, kids. Too much TMI. Okay, so just going to refine the shapes in the nose a little bit, get them a little more accurate so that I can get her nose feeling a little more realistic and pointed in the right direction. There's darker greens on the outer edge of her nose. That's really helping really define the shape of her nose quite well. So if I get those, both the accents along that contour and get the shape right, then that should really help. And then I'm also missing the top edge again, facing away from the light, so it's a little bit darker, just along the bulb of her nose, that shape there, and then starts to point a little bit up along the bony ridge of the bridge of her nose. And there's some green in there. So because the skin tends to be tight against the bone of the nose, and the skin tends to be smooth there, it does tend to reflect the main light source pretty well, just in general. So not 100% in every case, but in most portraits you'll do, there'll be reflected light just along the bridge of the nose, where it's the boniest, And then there's something called the catch light. It's on the tip of the nose, on the bulb of the nose. It will be reflecting right back at the light source, and that will be right. Oh, didn't do a great job there. Sometimes that catch light there, sometimes I nail it just the first time, and then I have to spend the whole painting protecting that spot. It's almost better not to get it right the first time. And then sometimes I'm just moving it around the whole painting, making it higher, lower, wiping it off, doing it again until it does feel like it is actually light hitting that part of the nose. It's important that it is just in the right spot where that the form is turning in the right way. There's two, in a form generally, there's two parts that will be light. There's where the form is facing directly towards the light source, and then there's a spot where it's reflecting the light source back to you. And those aren't usually in the exact same spot. Only if the light source is right behind you or right in front of you, if you're shining a light right on the light source, will those two things be in exactly the same place. So generally, there's going to be a little bit of darker flesh tones that are at where that reflected light source is, and if you can keep it dark enough, then you can really get that highlight to pop. Also, if you have something close to pure white or white with a little bit of a touch of color in it, and you paint it thickly, then it does really catch the catch more light in looking at it or photographing it, so it does tend to pop more than if it's a thinly painted light. Let me see. Um, Emma says, another fun fact about the photo, I was making this expression because originally this pic was sent directly to my boyfriend. I think that is what I was actually picking up on, not that you had a busted lip. Um, so um, there's kind of a sensual quality to it. I know it was meant for your boyfriend, but you are also posting it. So I think that hopefully I can get that kind of feeling in the painting. There's something about it that almost did feel a little bit like um, a fashion photography photo, even though some of the colors and the lighting isn't quite what you would call fashion photography. There is sort of an expressiveness about it that does feel like a photo that's supposed to be a little more sensual, that's posed. Okay, trying to get the shape of the eyes right here. Okay. So now that some of the values are starting to get a little bit closer, and at some point I'll put in her hand in the background so I can judge those values a little bit better, then I can really start to modify some of those to really get them really working together closely, modify some of the color relationships too, although in the end the colors will only play a secondary role in describing the form. It's mostly value. Um, Values do a much better job of getting form to turn than colors do. In the absence of changes in value, you can get colors to work in that regard. You can um, what's often done is what's towards you can be a little bit warmer, and what's turning away from you can be going duller or cooler. That can be turned around the opposite direction if there's a cool light source with warm shadows. But you can use color in that way. That's a way that the Impressionists or Sorolla or to some degree John Singer Sargent used color to get forms to turn. get a little bit of more orange flesh that then turns to green. I'm trying not to blend too much, but sometimes I also do want some of um, the nice effects of the. Sorry, I'm having trouble expressing myself. The effects of um, edges, softer edges that you can get with oil paints, and sometimes you can only get those by blending one uh, bit of wet paint into another. But the act of blending sometimes can be overdone, and you have to be careful because it can a painting can feel overworked really quickly if blending is just done absent-mindedly or done too much in a painting. Then the whole thing starts to look too soft and um, not really having the vitality of having really fresh, directly painted colors. Okay, so there's the general shape of the finger there, and then I can go in with what would be good for that background. Like I have phthalo emerald that I can mix with yellow, and that will give me a nice strong green color that will be a close match to the background. All right, I just cut off one of your fingers, Emma. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm going to have to adjust that wrist a little bit too somewhere because it is looking a little bit too thin, maybe on this side. And so let me see. Um, Ellen says, love it. Emma says, I went back and saved it because I realized later that it was a great picture and would make a great reference. Ellen says, oh my God, yes, I was going to say the expression is high fashion. The tilt and the slight parted lips, the teeth showing, and the eyes relaxed. The name of Emma says the name of the paint is Emerald. That's my given name. Oh, I see. So Emma is short for Emerald. Now I understand some of the channel names. Not channel names. What do you call them? Some of the profile names on your different social media accounts. So yeah, so there's a color that is called phthalo emerald. It's actually one of my favorite colors, and it is a color from Gamblin Paints. And if you look on their website, they say it's a great color, and they believe that more people would use it if if it had been in existence before phthalo green, because I think and I agree with Robert Gamblin in this regard, in that it fills a really great niche between phthalo blue and the next tranche of green colors, something like a sap green or olive green. It just fits in there really nicely, and it allows to get a really strong, cool green with a very high, um, very high tint strength. And when I say tint strength, I mean that when you mix it with white, it maintains its high key color or high amount of color saturation or chroma very well. So just how am I doing time wise? So I'm a little over an hour in. I'm starting to feel some of the forms maturing, materializing, what gelling. I'm not sure what the right word is. Yes, I'm starting to feel some of the forms gelling a little bit better. Really need to get a nice hit of white here in the eye. I've kind of blurred where the edge of her iris is there, and When I say iris, it is, I forgot to look to see what color eyes you have, Emma, but in this photo, your eyes are green. They're yellow green. So, not a very flattering color, but it works in this photo. Okay, so good night, Ellen. Says it's getting kind of late. I know that some of my audience is in different parts of the world. So um, while it may be 8 o'clock here, it might be 2 in the morning in London, or later in parts of the Middle East and Central Europe. So at some point, I am going to do probably an unannounced live video, live stream on YouTube on the weekend earlier in the day, some morning, and so that if some of my audience is online or on YouTube, they'll get a notice that I'm live and we'll be able to watch it live. Okay, so I need to define a little bit better the outer edges of the face. There's a shadow that's coming down here, and then the hairline that sweeps across goes very light green with some hair going that way. And then if I get in some of the black or darker green here, that's going to help define that outer edge. And let's get just a little bit of the color of the neck. Again, forcing myself to use a bigger brush because I don't know, that smaller brush snuck into my hand when I wasn't looking. Um, if there's one suggestion that I can make to people is that want to paint in Alla prima style, is to use the biggest brushes that you can to get the job done. That is a hard thing to do because it is very tempting to pick up a little brush and to poke around into the corners or try to fill out a big area with the little brush. And you don't get the same level of freshness that if you use a bigger brush. Oh, I just came in with a lot of white there, more than I wanted, but I don't think it will hurt me that badly. I'll just be able to paint back and forth into that a little bit. And there is a very warm shadow that's behind her ear that comes out a little bit further, then turns green. Lots of green. Okay, so have to remember that this dark shape here is a shadow of her arm onto her shoulder. And Emma says that her eyes are pretty gray in real life. Okay, so gray is going to be one of those colors that's going to pick up other colors readily. So in this case, picking up a lot of green. Just want to make sure that that cheek is turning to properly. I can't even tell you what color that is. It's just a kind of a light neutral along the side of her face. That's too green. There's a little bit warmer values in it. And then the shadow is a little bit darker up here. So if I get all those values right, then that form will start to turn properly. I just feel like I've made her face a little bit too wide. So I have to go back and look at what are the forms there that I have a little bit off to cut into her face a little bit. And then I don't have this form quite low enough. So I have to say I spend a lot of time generally on the contour of the face, working back and forth to get both the placement and how quickly it's turning in space to get that working. Um, and that is a real key to getting someone's likeness, or to get the feeling like it is the anatomy's right, because it's something that's usually very subtle in photographs, how quickly a form is turning, and it's real easy to get it sort of generally wrong. But by working back and forth and paying a lot of attention, you can eventually get it so that it's turning at the same rate that the photo is. So that's starting to be a little bit better. And then I have lost a whole finger here. That's right next to the eye. The top of her other finger is showing a little bit of the blood in underneath the skin that extremities tend to have. So I'm getting a little bit of red, or the pink that's in the fingertip. It also will help it read as a finger. And then the second finger is pretty, it's lighter but a little bit greener. So I'm just looking at the color relationships here to try to get those right. And then there's her brow ridge is actually protruding out over here, which I didn't paint in yet, or didn't really get in the right place. And then this has a little bit of a shadow underneath it. I don't know if that makes sense with the light source, but that's what's in the photo, so I'm just going to paint it that way. And then this contour does start up a little bit. So I definitely have some measurement that's off here. I can see that where her eyebrow sits, where it's meeting the contour of her face, is about 1.25 inches or so from the top of the panel. And here, that same measurement, I have it much higher. So to get that to feel right, and to get these little forms, which may seem like a small difference on the panel itself, in the actual anatomy, it's a big, can be a big distance. That's sometimes you do really have to pay attention in that respect. That something that can be off just by a little bit may have a huge, unproportional effect on the look of a painting. And it's not until you've moved those things into the right place does it actually read properly. And so that's where accuracy matters, is getting those things to read right. But sometimes you don't know until you get most of the painting down that something isn't sitting quite right, and then it takes a little bit of work to get it to do so. Little things like I do have still the highlight on the nose and a little bit in the wrong place, and until I get it in the right place, it's not going to read right. And then I've got entirely too much white there, but I can knock it back. And then this highlight on the nose, I actually have a little bit too high. Like I said, not until I painted it for the third or fourth time will I get it in the right place. Let's try a little bit again. I'm just putting a little bit of white right on the corner of the brush. Even if I have a big brush, I can control it to get, especially if the brush is still fairly new, I have a sharp corner on this flat, and I can get a little bit of the color right on the edge and then put it exactly where I want. So in that way I can get a lot of control out of a big brush. Don't want to do that throughout the whole painting though, because I might as well at that point just turn to a smaller brush. But this flat is great for getting kind of a carved look out of the painting, more sculptural, because I can just chisel away at at the forms until I'm getting the shape and the amount of turn that I want. I see that the green of her teeth um, still are up a little bit further out on the sides of her mouth there, and the lip comes out a little bit further. So just doing some adjustment there. And then there's a little bit of shadow that cuts in right here. That's looking a little bit better, except that I'm losing some of her incisor there. It's dropping down a little bit further. Too far. So it's not a crime to try to guess where something is and then going too far and then adjusting it back in the other direction. I'm just going to jump in with my smaller brush here to get a little more control in this tight space there. And I'll come in a little bit later and adjust some of the values. I don't really want to paint the outline of every tooth here. I just want to get a general sense of the teeth in the mouth. It's really not important, and besides it not being important, sometimes can detract from the painting to model or render the teeth out, because a lot of times it ends up looking really strange, not really necessary in most portraits to do it. I'm going to try to get I'm going to cheat and go wider so I can go lighter in that one reflection there, and then get a little bit darker red at the on her lower lip, and then even that go a little bit darker on the shadow. Try to get that lip to read, and I'm missing the crease between the upper and lower lip right here, so let me get that in. So that will help in the read of her lips a little bit. Okay, and so now that mouth is starting to read a little bit better. I have a pinkish highlight that's the top edge of her upper lip right here. I'm going to get that in. And it's not really reading that well, so which must mean that I'm not dark enough with the values around it. So there's a little bit of the upper lip that's facing upward that is a little bit darker than I have it, and right there that does help. Yeah, I may have gone a little bit too dark, but I always can come back the other way. But that is helping that highlight that's on her upper lip read a little bit better. And then my monitor might be a little bit dirty, but I think some of that is in the photo. There's a little bit of change in coloration in her lower lip, her upper lip rather, that's confusing the form a little bit. And what I want to make sure that I do is I pay attention to the anatomy. The philtrum comes down there, so there must be, and I do see it, a little bit of a shadow that's on above the edge of her upper lip that sits right there. And then generally on her lip there'll be this form that's the center form of the upper lip. The upper lip will generally tend to have three main forms to it: the center and the two wings going out, where the lower lip will tend to have two major forms. And so I'm seeing there's a little bit of a crease that's will also help give some dimension if I can get that painted in correctly to the lower lip. So that will get this top edge reading and then sliding underneath. Those little subtleties really do help describe the form. Okay, you guys are pretty quiet, so I'm just going to keep on going unless I see comments or questions. So now I want to start to focus in getting the sort of supporting areas of color and value in. I'm picking up my, again, my larger brush and getting in sort of her upper part of her chest. There's going to be her necklace that comes down here, which I'll put in a little bit. But I just want to get the general sense of the form here. Again, there's a crease where there's her neck is resting against her shoulder or coming out away from her shoulder. And then there's a little bit of red in her upper chest. And then there's an area of her chest where it goes into the shoulder that's catching a little more light. And again, that light is green. And then there's a fairly dark crease where that the chest and shoulder flesh is pressed against the arm. That actually comes down to about there. So I'm just, trying to keep in my head not just the shapes, but what it is that I'm actually painting, so that I can treat it properly, give it the right values that are going to get those things to turn the way I want. And I may not get it the first or second pass to read correctly, but I know that if I think about it in my head, then I know that I'm moving in the right direction. Some of it is just getting enough control over the paint to get the values down correctly. I am, while I'm thinking about it, I am going to get most of this value blocked in up here. I may do it kind of loosely because then I can leave some of the brushiness there if I decide to keep that. And then the hair, she has very thin wisps of hair initially coming in here that kind of blend in with her forehead colors. And then there's a spot where the hair is much thicker and it doesn't have a lot of light on it, and it's almost like a mauve-y purple color against all that yellow. And then we got nothing but green. So green with a little bit of black to give it enough value, darkness and value. Deep. Now I can't even describe it. A darker value. Okay, so a bunch of you are still with me here. Good. So I see about 6 people. I know Angela's there somewhere multitasking. If I say her name enough, she'll pop up again. I'm sure she's watching 2 TV shows and tuning into this and surfing the web and all at the same time. Probably making dinner while she's at it. So Angela is not an artist, although she does work with paints in her spare time, in her hobbies. But just being a good colleague, she tunes in to support me, which I think that's really nice. It's almost starting to look like something. I think it's really neat when you're working on a painting and you're kind of poking around, just putting in colors and forms and just sort of working away at it. And then there's a point where the whole thing feels like it's starting to emerge out of nothing. And I really like that moment where it starts to feel like something. Okay, I need to get a little bit of pure red and white in the cheeks there. Have to get a little bit darker to get enough of the color and value. And that has to be there to balance all that green, or it's just not going to work. And a little bit of that here too, along the nose. Okay. Emma says, I'm still here, just busy with my own sketch. Um, so I just wanted to say something here for a few people said that they wanted to paint along with me. So I'm not sure that everyone from who said from last week they wanted to, or on my Instagram post that they wanted to, but for anyone who is painting along with me, if they can get their finished painting or drawing to me, either um, by putting it on Instagram and tagging me in the post, or direct messaging the image to me, then I will put all the people who painted up on my Instagram post with my finished painting, so that we can all see together all the work that we've done. And I do have about almost 15,000 subscribers now, so it's also another way of getting your work out there. But I think it would be nice to see all the variation of work that's, if you feel comfortable enough doing it, of me sharing your work, it would be nice to see all the different approaches that are done from the same photo. That is, have to blend or tie together some of these values a little more closely. Um, I think a real common mistake that artists make is that where there's real subtle value or color changes, tend tend to want to paint those more with too great a difference, and it tends to lose some of the subtlety that it needs to make it work. And I would have to say that one of the things that a lot of people can do to improve paintings is to say to themselves, is this as subtle in the painting as it is in the photograph? Um, and just work back and forth until it does have that same degree of subtlety. A lot of times it won't even be so much a value change, or just will only be a color change, but a tendency would be to, well, to also put in a value change, and then and then the colors and the values in the overall painting will start to look too jumpy. The other thing I personally struggle with is the reflectiveness of the paint, and sometimes I have to knock it down with a softer brush to get it so that I can actually see the value that I'm painting, because there'll be too much reflected light from my lights in the studio. And this can be true when you display the painting too. There can be um, lighting that is reflecting too strongly off the surface of the painting and then making it really hard to see the painting itself. So Emma says, does that include non-paintings too? Yes, drawings, graphite sketches, all of it. I will put all of it up um, afterwards. So um, just on a side note is that I've found it really difficult to get my followers to jump platforms and come watch these on YouTube from Instagram. And so that's one reason why I did the poll, for people to choose the painting they wanted to see, is to just get a little bit more engagement. But I still see that the number of people um, that participated in that, compared to the number of people actually coming to watch, is quite low. And maybe there's a lot of people that intend on watching it later. But I just think it will end up taking time and giving people incentive to come over and to watch. Um, I think the reason why I'm doing this is to benefit them and those people that have come over to watch, or to paint with me. I think it's a great idea to I didn't think of it initially, but there was someone on last week, Randy, who said he really wanted to paint along with me, and I think that can be a very helpful tool to learning, is to see what I'm doing and and to paint at the same time, incorporating some of the ideas as you're watching and listening. So trying to get, there's these little reflective lights in the cheek. I'm just trying to put them down at first. At some point I need to pay attention to what the form is actually doing. For example, I know that there's a lower eyelid here that's greenish, a little bit darker than the colors next to it. I'll get a little more color in there. And that's facing down. And then there's the part of the upper cheek that's facing up. But I don't know why, if it's facing up, it's catching so much light, but it is. So I'll just have to assume it's not facing up so much that that it's sort of in shade or shadow. And then there is a little bit of, in Emma's green pallor, there's a little bit of, there's some bags that are showing underneath her eyes. Sorry about that, Emma. And it just has to do with the direction of the form there, that it's facing up a little bit more. So a little bit of orange and red in the upper part of her cheek there that I want to catch. So as I think through all these things and sort of chiseling or painting those little planes, then I'm going to get some of those forms to be better understood or pointing in the right direction. Just going to carve into the mouth a little bit to find that form here. Okay, Emma says that her own bags are pretty pronounced. I mean, the ones in her drawing. Um, yeah, adjusting the separation of the lips a little bit. Have to get that little bit of shadow that's underneath the lip that she's sticking out. So I really haven't paid attention very well to these forms in her chin. I need to get a little bit of the light that's reflecting off her hand that has kind of a reddish undertone. Again, this is from natural in the extremities to have a little bit more um, blood underneath the surface of the skin that gives it a little more reddish appearance. And then need to come in a little bit darker off the underneath the chin, make it a little bit sharper turn. And then there's a little bit of light on this lower edge here. So all I'm doing here, all I'm commentating on, is basically telling you the little adjustments that I'm making as I see them until the form is turning and describing the features in the way that I want it to. So I'll see something that should be in or shouldn't be in the painting that's appearing in the photo, and then I have to go in and try to represent that in the painting. That's the whole secret right there. There's nothing more to painting than that, and kind of a simplified way. It's seeing what's there. I mean, it's basically the act of observing, is seeing what's there and seeing how it's different than what you're painting, and then going in and making those adjustments. It almost sounds stupidly simple when I say it out loud, but or obvious, but I think that that people forget that that's the main tool to making something look like what you're painting, is to paint it the way it looks. Again, it sounds kind of dumb and obvious if I just say it like that. There's another part that that's a little bit more difficult, is to paint kind of what, not so much what you see, but what you know, in a way that that gives it more accuracy. There's a little bit of this reddish color in the shadow of her ear, and then it all goes green, a little more green than I have it there anyway. And then as the ear sort of gets lost in all that hair, the light is dropping off of it a little bit, except for these highlights that are coming in. And another one on the lobe of the ear. I'm just going to put those in, even though there's probably some shadows around it that I'm missing. As long as I get the right combination of shadows and highlights and some of the other tones. It's looking a little jumpy, but at least the ear is starting to read a little bit. So question, what is the favorite part of the face for me to draw and paint? I think that I like the whole thing. It depends also on the photograph. There'll be probably some part of it that really stands out. I do like the eyes a lot, and sometimes I'll sometimes exaggerate or put things in that aren't showing up in the photograph. Like sometimes I'll put a spot of a highlight in the white of the eye that isn't there. First, I want to make sure that the eye feels like it's turning, and sometimes in the photograph there isn't enough information there to get that a sufficient amount of turn, and so sometimes I'll exaggerate that a little bit, and that's going greener. I need to get my emerald, phthalo emerald in there a little bit. That's just that and white. is the color of the whites of her eyes. So I need to get a little bit more of that color in there. And so what's making that turn is that there's a darker value near the tear duct, although I see a little bit of a light there. And then the white of the eye that's right up against the iris. And there's a fairly smooth transition between the two. And I'm just going to work back and forth. If I get that really smooth transition, then I'll get the sense that the form is turning away, plus the little bit of the contour of the lid is going to help that, because that comes up around and then makes a little curved shape there. So that's going to help. Still not quite there yet. Try to get a little more white on the brush there. Of course, I just wiped out what I just put in. Okay. And then sometimes what I like to do is just put a highlight right on the light of the eye there, especially if I make the rest of the white of the eye dark enough so that reads. That's not really working so great there, but maybe I can play with it to get it to work. And then if I get the shape of the iris right, then I can then go ahead and put the highlight in. And let me define the pupil a little bit better. Oh, really came in heavy-handed there. But it's actually not too bad. Let's carve the iris a little bit better. Okay, and now I'm going to come in with the highlight. And if I do that right, you're going to just feel the glassiness of that eye. Let's see if I can find a little bit better brush for doing this. My work area is a little bit of a mess, so I have some new brushes over here, and I have the perfect one. Okay, so I have a nice new brush here, hasn't ever been used. It's a little bit bigger than I want for putting this in, but I'm putting the highlight in, but I'm just going to get a little bit of white onto the corner of the brush, and then I can just touch that corner. I think I need a little more paint on the brush. I need to go in pretty thick so that just by touching it I can get the paint to come away rather easily. And I'm going to just do it one more time. Oh, that's a little bit too much, but I'm just going to leave that for now. No, I lied. I'm going to carve into it a little bit. Wow. So this is the place where there's the most contrast in the whole painting. There's the black of the iris, black of the pupil rather, and the one of the strongest highlights, and that is really going to draw your eye in. And I'm going to do the same with the other eye. And if I have that eye, really isn't really that finished, but sometimes I just like putting those little touches in. If it's not in the right place, I know that makes it harder to move it later on. But then it really gives me the sense that the painting gives a little bit of force to the paint that's there by giving the visual quality of that surface. Sometimes I've had instructors that say, don't paint the highlights, don't do that stuff early in the painting, you wait to the very end. And, I'm a little impatient. I want to see it. I want to feel like it's glassy. I want to feel like it's the eye turning away from me. I want to feel like it's looking at me. All those things that start to make it feel real. I want to get some of those things in so I get a sense of that I'm actually painting something. And so those little bits of highlight, although it does make it harder if you've painted some feature a little bit in the wrong place and you have to move it, so you have to paint all those little pieces over again. But I've done it enough. I know how to paint an eye. I can paint an eye, and a few minutes if I need to. So painting out an eye and painting it in again is not a big deal. In fact, I say the more that you repaint it, the better you get at it, and the less afraid you are at changing things if that need to be changed in the painting. So what I'm missing is some little bit of flesh that's the corner of her eye that's being pushed up into the pupil, and the eye, sorry, pushed up into the iris. I don't know why I keep on saying that wrong, but you know what I mean. So, and I'm missing the crease. It's very subtle in the photo, but there's, just because the way the light's hitting it, there's a crease of the upper eyelid that's just fairly faint, and then there's a little bit of darker value on the far edge that's helping it turn. Just get that in. And so that, and along with a little bit of yellowish green that's on the near part of the lid, that's getting that, making it feel like it's turning in space. And then I'm missing, there's a little bit of a red dark, which you would expect to see in the, towards the tear duct. I may have gone a little bit too strong there, but that's fine. And a nice reflected light, right, not reflected light, a nice highlight right in the corner of the eye there. And then at this point I can put in my other reflected light that's sitting right on the pupil. And I'm going to get, again, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of white just right on the corner of the brush. And okay, so now I start to feel like somebody is looking at me there, which is kind of what I want. And I'm just going to go through and knock back some of where there's a little bit too much contrast in the transition between colors and values, or missing highlights. So hopefully this will start to help pull the whole thing together a little more quickly. Just, I can come in, and even with no paint on the brush, I can pull away some of the paint that's there. Again, I want to be careful not to like over blend and work by doing that. And then where I can, come back in with fresh paint so that it all feels like quickly, freshly painted. I at some point I was struggling a lot with portraiture. I'm getting better as I do it more over these last couple years. And I would watch videos of other artists working, a couple of them to note, who have very good DVDs out. One is Jeremy Lipking, who does some demo videos. And the other one, another couple that I've watched, one is Dan Gerhardt's and Morgan Westling. And my biggest takeaway from watching them paint is just the pace at which they paint. From looking at their paintings, I always imagine that they're taking a big brush and they're just painting really quickly to get that kind of what looks like rapid brush strokes on the painting. And watching them paint, I realize that there is a completely different pace to how they're painting. It's a much more slower, methodical motion in painting, and really carefully placing paint stroke next to paint stroke, not what I pictured in my head. And once I realized that, that really helped my painting, because I was no longer trying to take rapid stabs at something and hoping that it would come out right. I could slow down and very carefully and methodically put down the colors and values that I wanted. And still, if you're putting down fresh paint on top of wet paint, the overall effect will be as if it were painted rather quickly. It's kind of a, what's the word? It's a little bit of a deception in a way, the way it comes out. It looks so, oh, quick and fresh. But it's, in reality, it's painted just as slowly as something that sometimes requires hundreds of little careful brush strokes. This is just maybe done with a bigger brush, but still very slowly and carefully. Okay. Um, Still trying to get the sense of the division between the whites of the eyes and the lower lid underneath it. Not quite getting the right color. It's a little bit more yellow orange here in this right here. It does probably has a little bit of a darker edge than I'm putting. It's very subtle, and I just want to get some of that in. I exaggerate it maybe a little bit at first and then knock it back so that it's kind of there, but then not. So as I then take it away, there's still the presence of it is there. And I've totally, doesn't actually have to be there if it's not that obvious, but the that upper eyelid, the crease in the upper lid is kind of subtle, a little bit green, and on one side and a little bit orange on the other. And I just want just enough to indicate that it's there to help the turn of the eyelid, and then the change of direction between the eyelid and the area above her eye. So when I say change of direction, this is moving away from us as it drops down, and then the eyelid is moving towards us. So I need at least enough information there to tell us that that is happening. I'm putting in a little bit of the highlight that's there. And all these highlights should be aligned with the highlight of that's in the eye itself. So that gives you an indication of where the light source is. You see a highlight here on the eyelid, you see a highlight in the eye, and then you see a little bit of a highlight in the cheek, and all those are fairly aligned with each other. So then it's worth it just to go in and make sure that that you do have those alignments that are working, and then that will really help the form read much better. As those highlights change direction, then it really does help turn those forms into space, forms in space. Okay, so I have, let me see, I started at 7, and I said I tried to paint in 2.5 hours. So I have about a half hour left. So I'm really going to start to get down to business here. Make sure that the overall painting is working, and to get the paint down that I want to get down. So get my bigger brush out, get my hammer, and start putting in these some more hair, and also make sure I'm getting that kind of the swoop of the hair in there at the same time, using that wet paint to allow me to do that. Here I can be a little bit freer with my brush work. It's a good opportunity to show off the spontaneity that comes with painting wet into wet. I have a swooping hair here that I can put in that goes darker and greener as it comes around. So I'm going to make sure I got a little bit of green, darker green paint on here. And I do have transitional color in the hair right here that I'm missing. So sometimes where things are supporting your focal area, you want to get the general value and color there to support it, but you may not want all the detail because you want the really people to focus in on the part of the painting that is important, that you decide is important. But if you go ahead and put detail after detail in all areas of the painting, then what you're really doing is pulling away attention from the part of the face or the painting that you want people to look at. And it also, in a way, relieves you of having to paint every little square inch. Take the opportunity to not over render those areas, especially if, like I am right now, on a time budget as I'm doing this painting. Okay, missing some of the forms. So let me see. Haha, should say okay. So Emma asks, question, what's your favorite part of the face to draw paint? I especially enjoy noses and ears. Well, oh, okay, I already read part of that question. So I did say eyes. And let's we'll clarify the form here, which is that part around the eye where the finger is pressed into the face does go a little bit darker right here. Make sure that I do have enough red in that color, like I said before. And then get the right shape, which I don't quite have in that second finger back. And then I have to carve into the back side of it a little bit. Okay, that's looking better. And I need that little bit of shadow up here. And then there's kind of a greenish orange color to her eyebrows. I know that just sounds wrong to paint eyebrows greenish orange, but what can I tell you? That's the way they look in the photo. I assume in real life they would probably look close to that, but there may be some color distortion going on in the photo itself with all this green lighting, but it may not be quite as green orange and may be more of a neutral color. One thing that I found with photos online and photos in Sketchy with all of the filters, occasionally you'll come across one that you like but has been over filtered so that you really can't get a sense of the colors anymore, the original colors. And I try to avoid some of those because they just become too hard to paint. Almost sometimes rather start off with a black and white photo than an image that's been over filtered. Okay, and missing some of that beautiful green color that's in that upper part of the eye. And I'm not going dark enough on her far part of her upper lid. It's really not that much darker than the colors around it, but it is darker. And like I said, I have to be careful not to go too dark when I see it. That is too dark, so I'm going to try to wipe some of that back or blend it in just a little bit. And I want to get some of that nice pink that's just right underneath her nose, part of the nostril. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of looking back and forth and adjusting as I go. Um, I am not actually that far from being finished, but so that gives me some time to do some very very subtle changes, which will help this painting out a bit. Okay, I still see we have 6 people with us. Not really sure whether it's the same 6 people, whether some people have tuned in and other have dropped off, but that's okay. Okay, I have something a little off here. So I'm missing a little bit of the shadow that's along the side of her face here. That is helping. And then I have to adjust the shadow that's underneath her jaw and make it a little bit tighter, oranger, or redder. Okay, I need a little bit of my alizarin permanent there. And then, so part of little subtleties that change the gesture a little bit. Um, they're important to get right. So this area of light of her neck is much closer in here. So this is actually going to get a sense that her head is turning against the direction of her neck. And unless I get that placement correctly, it's not going to feel that way. So there's going to be a little bit of a pinch of the forms right in here, and then this is going to fall away into shadow, and this is where all the tension is right here, and then it loosens up um, as the front of the neck gets pushed forward and wraps around. So we have the head is pointed towards us, and the neck is pointed in a direction kind of away from us, and that's what's creating that tension there, that little bit of a pinch, and then the neck is then turning away from us rapidly here, and so then I'm starting to get that part to read, and then I need a little bit of the neck to be pointed more forward here, and so I need to get this white closer in color, and then it's shifting a little bit to green as it moves around, and then we'll have this harder shadow on the far edge. Okay, that is not quite right yet, and then there's some hair that's wrapping around from the back side. So let's put some of that in. I know that doesn't look quite like the right color, but you know what? It's not really so important that all that color matches. What's important is to get the feeling of it. And some of that hair comes in front of that shadow, breaking that up a little bit. And then the back side, or the inside edge of the arm, where that crease is, there's also a shadow underneath that, and then there's some orange, darker orange value that's next to it that's helping that form turn. Let's see if I can get that color right. It's a little bit orange, black, mixed with not enough, too much black and not enough color, mixed with a little bit of red to keep it from going too yellow. So when you mix black, especially this ivory black with orange, it's going to push it more golden. That's from the little bit of the blue-ish tones that are in the black, pushing the orange more in a green direction. And so sometimes you need to then adjust by adding a little bit of red to that mixture to get it in the right hue, to keep it sort of in the orange family. Then some of that hair is then going over to green here. Okay, and so where that cast shadow from the arm is coming across the shoulder, it the form is kind of round there, and I have the shadow actually cutting straight. And so unless I'm following the form, the shadow's following the form, it's not going to read quite right. And then as the shadow then starts, almost that crease ends close to that point, and then as it starts into the upper arm, it's doing the same thing. It's following the form again. So if I pay attention to again to those little subtleties, then I'll get the form to read much better. And I want to really cheat it and get a little more black, if even if that's not quite the right color there. I need it to go dark enough, and I almost don't care if there's any color reading in that really dark space. I can put a little purple in if I really want it to read as a color, or a little bit of some other transparent color so that color reads in there. What I'm really getting though is starting to see a little bit of green in that darker area, and then it's transitioning to be more redder as it gets to the edge of the shadow. So I am going to put a little bit, even fake it a little bit, put in more color than it's actually there. Okay, so I can see also that I don't have the contour of her chin quite right yet. I need a little bit of water here. Yeah, excuse me. Excuse all the gulping. And I just dripped a bunch of the condensated water from the glass onto my hand and paintbrush, so that's not really going to help. But what I can see is that where the cut of her jaw is not quite right. It's like a little bit too low, making her chin seem too broad. And so I um, need to carve in and adjust that a little bit. And so these are the kind of adjustments I'm talking about that come towards more towards the end of the painting to get things to read properly. And now it's also feeling like her chin is a little bit too long, so just got to keep on adjusting some of those shapes to get it to read properly. And get a little bit of the dark green that's on the far side of that hand. So that also is reading. So part of what I'm missing of the anatomy is that there's the finger here where the nail is. There's one knuckle that it comes down into another knuckle, and then there's the main finger joint where it comes into I forget what that's called, metacarpal or something like that. So I don't have to spend a lot of time getting that anatomy right, but it does help just to indicate it, so that it does feel like a finger. And then this should feel like the back of the hand that's then curving around. So it's important to maybe pay a little bit of attention to that form there as it relates to the rest of the hand. And then I have the main form of the hand that sits then behind the wrist. And then again, you have this tension of the wrist that's going kind of away from us in space. And then the under part of the hand that's coming towards us. I get that curve feeling right. I just picked up a little bit too much green there, more than I wanted. And so that's going to help that to read. And then I have a little bit of the features in the wrist that are creating a little bit of an interesting shadow there. And I'm just going to indicate that so that anatomy on the wrist starts to read. And then there's just a little bit of shadow there in the photo. Can't tell you what all that anatomy is just from this angle, but I do see it in the photograph, so I'm going to try to mimic that a little bit. And then there's a lot of light that I'm missing, greenish light, of course, right here in the wrist. And this separation is feeling a little bit too strong. There's nothing worse than you see someone who's painted a hand and every part of the anatomy is over painted, so it just feels like a jumbled lump of forms instead of something that should feel a little more graceful. So sometimes it's worth it to break down those separations a little bit more so that it does feel a little bit nicer than than just copying the forms in the painting. Okay, so what I see here is that her hand is very light in the photo up against the values in the cheek, and what I don't have is enough of, except for the little bit of reddish shadow that's here, I don't have that edge of the cheek quite dark enough yet, and then maybe some of the values in her cheek herself. So I'm just going to try to get those a little bit darker. And then I have this opportunity to get a little bit of red in here. Like I said, the red is what's going to balance all that green. And I need to get some of that in the cheek and indicate a little bit of this bottom edge of this cheek, which is going to get this form to read, give her a little bit of puffiness in her cheeks. So if I start off here is where it's lightest and I slowly go into a darker value, that's going to help turn that form a little bit. And then a little bit of the shadow, and again it's that change in value is not that much. And then we have a little bit of the soft forms in her jaw pointing up towards us again, and then I'm totally missing it. It's the values on the lower part of her. Okay, I just went too strong there, but it is in the right direction. The values on the lower edge of her jaw that really is going to help turn that form away from us. Let me just soften those up a little bit. And then I really need to go darker here. There really isn't as much light as what I put in there. Still not getting this where her jaw is pinching against her neck. I'm not getting those value changes right. So I'm going to just work on that for a few minutes. Just soften up some of those transitions. And then there's a little bit of where that is in tension there. There's a little bit of a fold of, it's not quite a wrinkle, but a crease in her skin there that is catching, the top edge is catching the light right there. And then it does the same thing lower on, just sort of the natural wrinkles in the neck. And there's a little bit of some green values in between there. And again, I have some more of those folds in there. And then it does finally turn away from the light near the base of the neck. So overall, I would have to say the neck is still feeling kind of thick. So I want to make sure that I really have the back of the neck tucking away there. That did help right there. And then I want to get some indications of hair that's coming out here to help define where um, the neck is receding. You may not see the back of the neck, but you get a feeling of the recession of the neck there. I'm just putting, I almost don't care what color anymore. I'm so over the green color here that I don't care if it's green or not, but okay, there's the green. Okay, so what am I missing? I don't have her necklace painted in, which I wanted to do. This is sort of just orange, just like a little bit of a shadow that's coming down. And then the same on the other side. So it's coming right off the ear here, coming down. And that part of the chain there is catching some light, and I can choose to load up with yellow or load up with white, whether it's like gold or a silver. But I think that overall it's kind of a greenish white that's hitting that. And then I have to make sure the values are dark enough again around it. It's a little bit of a orange and green together. Really should have painted that first, but that's okay. I can do it afterwards, just as long as it's getting that sort of metallic feeling that I'm after. And then I can come in and hit it especially hard in a couple spots to really get the sense that it's glowing. And then that little bit of bare canvas, normally I would like to leave something like that here, but it is taking away from that gold reflection or the metallic reflection of the jewelry, so I'm just going to knock that back and see if I can improve the shape of the neck there. A little bit of her Adam's apple. I don't want to change her gender there, but I just want to give an indication of it. And then where her neck comes around. Okay, that is starting to read. I am going to improve the direction of the angle of her eye a little bit and give her the beautiful lashes she deserves right here that come all the way across over the form of her finger. And it's just, if I could just work into this for another 5 hours and I would be happy, but I wouldn't necessarily be improving the painting. That's why I have to be careful to keep some of the freshness that's there. Don't feel like I have all the forms and the lower part of her nose right yet, but don't think I want to go overboard in fixing that. I just want to really just give an indication of where the top of her nose is and enough darks around that highlight that it's reading properly. There's a little bit of a ledge here that I want to get, and then an upward shape in her nostril, and there's a little bit of an outer shadow or darker area before it really gets into the crease of the nose, which is then very orange red. And sometimes hitting that strong color that really does give a lot more interest to the painting, not really have that far edge of her nose dark enough and yellow enough. I think that's the color I'm looking for right there. Get that little bump in her nose, and then comes out to really help define that. And so what's nice, right, what I put in right there is that shadow now is dark enough to help support that feeling of light that's on the tip of her nose. And I have to get that shape just right there. So she has a little bit of shadow on the under edge too. Okay, so just gonna add more, hit that light spot harder. And get a little more green shadow under the under part here. And there's a little dip here. Okay, so some of that's starting to feel a little bit fleshy, which I want. I'm missing a little bit of pink here on the outer edge. Can carve into that a little bit. It just needs to be a little bit darker with a little more color. Okay. Let's see if I can get some of those greenish highlights in. Oops, that's not the right green. It needs to be yellower. So I can almost go pure yellow and white in some of these spots, I think, and still be in the right hue. Okay, knock this back a little bit there. Okay, I'll make sure that the side of her face is falling away a little bit, down, away from us. Gonna punch this little bit of shadow here to feel the little bit of the hollow of her cheek coming down. I don't know if that's the hollow of her cheek, but the separation of her cheek and her jaw. And then it, guess what? It turns to green as it comes towards the ear. What a surprise, more green. So I want to try to, if I get some of those colors and values right, it really will start to feel a lot fleshier, which I'm kind of after, and not just a bunch of paint sitting on a panel. It's a little bit of a light green in there, again green. And see if I can get a little bit of green shadow here to help turn that form away from us, as it also will separate the chin from the cheek here as it comes up. And then I do really want to improve the shape of the chin there. A little bit of value change on the underside of that. And a little more orange in the. Okay, let's see. So this is where I start doing a lot of squinting. I have just, I'm just going to paint for a few more minutes here since we're getting towards the, past the time I said I would be painting. But at some point I do also have to step back, and if it's working, I just need to let it go. Just want a little bit of indication of her fingernail. I think it's going to add a lot. Of course, it's a little bit greenish. And there's a little bit of red that comes right up against it, right there. Red, darker. And I want to get the shape of that contour right. And cut into it a little bit here, more than I have. This comes out. Okay, and just a little bit of getting the force of that arm that's coming up into the chin. Keep some of that red that was there before. Okay, so I think that's really pretty close to where I want it to be. I am probably going to do a few touches offline, then I can really concentrate, but that's where I'm going to leave it for right now. Thank you all that have come in and joined me. Feel free to leave more comments of this video, and or rewatch it if you feel like. Please tune in next week if you want, where I'll do this again. I think the date is the, let me look on my calendar real quick. Let me see. The date for the next one will be the meow, says Pasha. Yeah, so next Tuesday, the 5th, I will be doing another demo with option C. I'll have her name and I'll post a little bit more information about it. Please join me then, and I hope to see if any of you have painted or drew along, like Emma. I'd like to see those, and I'll post those to my Instagram feed. And so thank you very much, and have a good night.